Let's talk to Larry C. Johnson now, so he's got at least 15 minutes to the bottom of the hour to really have the floor and break down this whole controversy. Thank you for coming on, Mr. Johnson.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Good, good. So you've heard my breakdown of this. I mean, how accurate is that from your educated standpoint?
Well, yeah, it's the essence of the story. We've got a lot of things going on here. I guess the real fundamental thing that ought to alarm all Americans, regardless of their political party, their political affiliation, is what has been going on with former leaders of the Central Intelligence Agency and in the Director of National Intelligence Agency's office is direct interference in the domestic politics. If we're going to talk about Russian meddling in U.S. politics, it needs to be acknowledged that these intelligence agencies or principals at the top were involved with meddling. Now, do I have firsthand knowledge that John Brennan was doing this? No, I do not. I have been told, though, by someone who is in a position to know, who's still within the intelligence community, that absolutely that's what was going on. That Brennan and that there were shenanigans going on between the GHCQ and U.S. intelligence. How does that work? You've got your listeners should understand that it is illegal without some warrant for any of the intelligence or law enforcement agencies to collect on American citizens. It is not illegal for the British, through their version of NSA, to collect on American citizens because we're foreigners as far as they're concerned, and we're a legitimate target. Similarly, the United States can freely collect on any British citizen because they're not Americans. They don't have the constitutional protection.
We all spy on each other then.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, if anybody's so naive as to think that the Brits aren't spying on Americans and Americans aren't spying on Brits, well, you know, yeah, I hate to burst your bubble, but the reality is that's what spy agencies do. They collect and gather intelligence on other entities. That's one of their purposes.
Well, remember the scandal just 4 years ago where the CIA was spying on Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, the Intelligence Committee heads.
Right. Well, and that was, you know, John Brennan, again, had his fingerprints all over that because they didn't want the information about the torture report to come out. And Brennan initially denied that that was going on and then later had to admit that it had in fact happened. So it's not, you know, we're not raising these allegations without precedent. And, you know, my concern here is that involving intelligence agencies in domestic politics takes us down a very, very dangerous road.
Exactly. I mean, we have laws since 1947. The CIA is like the MI6. It's outside the country. The FBI is within. But we all know that, I mean, I think the CIA is probably even more involved in the FBI domestically with just the numbers of actual people because it's covert by nature. You can't help but get the people that are in the CIA to end up being involved politically just because of their own political views. But then separately, you had all the Russian agents and HUMET during the Cold War were crawling all over the place. And then you had to have CIA domestically. So I mean, isn't it a big lie to claim we don't have supposedly foreign projected intelligence agencies operating domestically?
Well, they're not supposed to. And there are rules that have been set up. But again, this goes back to the question of leadership. At both the head of the Director of National Intelligence under the Obama administration, Jim Clapper, you had someone who went and lied under oath before Congress. When you lie under oath before Congress, there should be some sanction. There was no sanction. He was not punished. He finished out his tenure with getting awards at the end and a pat on the back, and he's probably out with some nice fat consulting agreement right now. Similarly, John Brennan got caught lying about what they were doing, spying on the Senate. Again, was there any sanction? So when the people who are in the trenches look at their leaders and see the leaders getting by with lying, and then it sends a message that, okay, it's okay for us to do it too.
Let me boil that down then. It's simple. These are known liars who've been caught lying, who've been caught spying on the Senate and their bosses in the Intelligence Committee. That's undebatable. The president reads in the newspaper that he's been spied on by the intelligence agencies in the New York Times. It's all over the news. We've got the intercepts. We caught, you know, Michael Flynn. Right. And then it turns out they didn't really catch him doing anything. Trump turns it around and says that's illegal. Then they say we never did that. I mean, talk about gaslighting.
Well, right. And there was the article, I think it appeared, March 1st in the New York Times. Now, this is just over about 2 weeks ago. And here's what it says. American allies, including the British and Dutch, had provided information describing meetings in European cities between Russian officials and others close to Russia's President Putin and associates of President-elect Trump. Okay, let me translate that for your listeners. There's only two types of information those countries are going to have. Either they've got human intelligence, they had a spy who was there, who was part of the meeting and could report on it, or they had an intercept, a wiretap, if you will. But, wiretaps, it goes back to the days when all communication went over a phone wire. It's really more correct to call all of this electronic surveillance.
What do you just make of CNN with Anderson Cooper, who won't tell people he was an intern at the CIA and then got out of it? Yeah, right. And now he's up here telling us that, nobody's spying on Trump and trying to sell us a preposterous line when even someone that's not politically informed about what's happening, with the NSA or surveillance knows. They were all over the news bragging. We have the intercepts of Trump and his people talking to the Russians. Right. And then now, a month and a half later, they want us to forget. And then they're saying, you're wrong, Napolitano's wrong, Trump's wrong. Speak to that, and then why do you think your interview, because it's not just here, other places, YouTube, Google, it's being blocked everywhere, being delisted. They really didn't like you speaking out.
Well, I'm used to being censored. Look, I got fired as a Fox News analyst. They didn't renew my contract because I went on Hannity and Combs in November of 2002 and said that going in Iraq would be a diversion in the war on terror. And I was told later that Roger Ailes directed that I was not to be allowed back on air because they didn't want that point of view.
By the way, you were the deputy head of counterterrorism, so you'd know.
Well, I was the deputy director, and yes. I had a real long title, so I was not really the number 2 guy.
The point is, you're an expert on it, and you were really being honest. And by the way, Donald Trump agreed with you back then.
Yeah, that's the fact. What's going on here is the media has invested itself in a particular narrative, and they're not going to give it up, and they won't allow anybody to come on and actually have a debate about it and talk about it in substance.
I remember seeing you on Fox. I mean, I used to really make great points that I actually agreed with, but again, because you didn't totally toe the line, we're taking out the wrong Muslims if they're the non-radicals. We wouldn't be Saudi Arabia or somebody. We wouldn't be taking out, Saddam, right?
Yeah, and look, we've yet to come to grips with the reality that when we remove Saddam Hussein, we essentially lit a fuse on a giant bomb that's blown up in our face. And that's where this spread of ISIS and Al-Qaeda that has taken place.
And you warned of that back at the time, because I remember seeing the news articles.
Yeah. So, it's really not that complicated, but we get other things going on. And so now that I have the audacity to suggest that Russia may actually be a victim in some of these activities, and that we on the United States side are doing things that, when viewed from a Russian perspective, would alarm them. I mean, let me just give you a very simple example. 2 weeks ago, and then earlier this week, you get reports in the U.S. news media about a Russian spy ship off our East Coast. And the news media reports it breathlessly as if, look at what those dastardly Russians are doing. Yet nobody in the media is reporting that the U.S. military is conducting military exercises. 2 weeks ago, we were conducting a naval exercise in the Black Sea that was simulating a war with Russia. Now, if Russia was conducting military exercises off our shores, simulating an attack on us, or
off the coast of, say, Houston,
yeah, or had troops in Mexico and Canada. Right now, we have troops in Poland. 2 weeks ago, we had troops in Romania that were carrying out military exercises. So my only point, I'm not to excuse the Russians, but I'm simply saying, let's recognize there's a context for this. They're not reacting in a vacuum. And by the simple fact that I bring that up, I've been accused as being a propagandist, a puppet of Putin, a Russian stooge. And
well, since you raised that, did you see the clip where McCain says, like 4 times, but he repeats it, he says, you are an agent of Putin, violating, was it Rule 19 in the Senate? But just crazy. No one could ever claim that Rand Paul's a Russian agent because he doesn't want to start a war with Russia while China is in the South China Sea, North Korea is threatening to nuke people. We may have to have a war any day. I mean, this is one of the most dangerous times ever. I want to see if you agree. Rex Tillerson says military options on the table. And then meanwhile, we're worried about Russia that's not expanding.
Yeah, well, and Senator Paul made an excellent, I mean, he made a substantive argument later, I think, the Falling Down Morning Joe on MSNBC, where he laid out the fact Montenegro is such a poor country. They're so weak militarily, they add nothing to NATO, and they're not going to be able to pay their full weight. So why in the world would we want to bring them into NATO? Because there's nothing to be gained from a strategic.
Unless you want to use it as a trigger for another crisis.
Say what?
Unless you want to use it as a trigger for another crisis.
No, and that's exactly right. This is, you know, what most Americans fail to understand. We take great pride in our, you know, the greatest generation who fought World War II and everything that they endured and our great sacrifices. You know, we lost the total number of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines that died in World War II in both the Pacific and European theater. There were 470,000. The Russians at the Battle of Stalingrad, one battle over a 6-month period, lost 1 million soldiers. My point in this is they're a lot more sensitive to threats on their border than we are. And they view the military activities such as the ones we're conducting as provocative. And the last time they had that kind of military activity on their borders was in May of 1941.
It was Operation Barbarossa.
Made by the Nazis.
It was Operation Barbarossa was about to kick off.
Yeah, so I'm just, it's not to apologize for Putin. You know, Putin's a bad guy and does some bad things, but hello, he's not the only one in the world.
Well, sure, but wouldn't you agree that China is probably right now 10 times the threat that Russia is? They're just running wild.
Yeah, no, China is a much more organized threat to the United States, particularly on the economic side. I mean, I could take you through case after case.
If you have time, let's do it. I know you probably got to go soon. If you stay a little bit after the break in a few minutes, please do. But just getting back to this New York Times writer, I want to play a short clip where he claims Trump got the idea from me that there was wiretapping. No, it was in the New York Times. I mean, I've never seen such attempts at just bizarre, you know, the sun isn't in the sky at noon. I don't know as a CIA guy what you'd call this, but it's just like the worst gaslighting I've ever seen. Let's play this clip.
Has heard. What do you make of the White House citing your article as part of the evidence?
I mean, it's getting bizarre at this point because we've said it very clearly, and I said on your show, that that's not what the story said. Anybody can read the story and see that's not what it said. And so there's this bizarre circular thing happening where the president cites a theory that he was wiretapped, which developed on the kind of fringe right-wing media.
There it is. There it is, fringe wire. And he wrote an article the day before.
And after his tweet storm, InfoWars then started saying, well, look, it was the New York Times that reported it, citing our story, misreading our story. And now, a few weeks later, the White House and the president are citing InfoWars. So they've got one kind of bizarre right-wing fringe theory to defend another bizarre right-wing fringe theory, both of which there's no evidence to support.
And just to be clear here, there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's absolutely nothing whatsoever in your reporting in the New York Times that indicates President Obama wiretapped or ordered wiretapping of then candidate Trump, correct?
Nothing. I mean, if we knew that, that is a fantastic story.
That's a fantastic story. It was all over CNN everywhere. We have the intercepts. We've caught General Flynn. He better resign. We have the transcript. And then they wouldn't release it because there was nothing there. He was lining up a phone call. We're showing you the articles of your radio listener. Intercept Russian communications. Part of inquiry into Trump. Matthew Rosenberg and phone calls from Trump Tower being intercepted. Man, that guy. What would you call Mr. Rosenberg politically? I mean, what is he doing there?
A disinformation specialist. Look, he faults Donald Trump for being able to read. I mean, your listeners and those who are watching, if you simply, the headline simply states, wiretapped data used in inquiry of Trump aides. It wasn't, Donald Trump didn't write that headline. Alex Jones didn't write that headline. That was written by this guy, and then the guy who writes it has the audacity to claim, well, this is somebody else's fault. I mean, you know, we are living in such a surreal, dangerous time. It's literally the world that, you know, we read about as children in Alice in Wonderland, that was a fictional world, we're now seeing it in real time, where objective facts are suddenly dismissed as being, right-wing conspiracy theories. And it's just, to me, it's alarming because it really threatens the foundation of our republic.
It does. Can you elaborate on that again? NoQuarterUSA.net, Larry C. Johnson, on why you're saying we're in such a dangerous place for our republic.
This is supposed to be a nation of laws. And look, we can't just blame it on Obama, because it goes back. It goes back really to the foundations. Let's say with Bill Clinton is really where we started seeing the worm turn, but it continued on through George W. Bush. And when you essentially lie a country into a war in Iraq, and you raise that, and all of a sudden you're either a leftist nut or whatever. You lose your moral high ground, and then the sky's the limit. Yeah. Well, there's no, right now we have, I fully support destroying ISIS. However, what's not being debated in this country is the fact that under Obama and now under President Trump, we've put U.S. troops in a foreign country without a declaration of war. Larry C. Johnson, you'd only said you'd come on till the half hour. Can you do a few more minutes and finish up on the geopolitical for folks? Sure, I can do that. All right, we'll be right back. Well, we got to get this guy on more often. I remember seeing him on Fox for so long, read a lot of his writings, and then there's these great guys you don't see him anymore because they're censoring him. And then when he does an interview, they block it on Facebook. And then Gizmodo writes an article going, yeah, ban it, good. That's Univision saying ban American press. So we've got him for another 12 minutes, and I appreciate him joining us. NoQuarterUSA.net, a lot of amazing information there. Again, a highly decorated former member of the CIA, then counterterrorism, State Department, former Fox News analyst, you name it, breaking all this down. So please continue with just the waterfront of what's going on with ISIS, what you see happening, where you see globalism right now. Well, what's happened over the last 5 weeks is that President Trump has lifted what were called restricted airspaces. I think the military acronym for it is RAS. Previously, Obama had imposed restrictions in certain areas that no action could be taken unless he gave approval for a strike. So if we had a drone operating there and it observed a convoy, a military convoy of ISIS fighters, or oil convoy taking oil from an ISIS-controlled oil field, and it was in a restricted area, permission to strike that target had to go up the chain of command, which means ultimately it made its way to the White House, and literally Barack Obama had to say yes or no. Well, practically what happens is that means you'll never hit one of those targets, but because by the time you jump through all those hoops, the convoy has long gone. Donald Trump lifted that. The attacks on those convoys have been underway over the last 5 weeks, and there have been significant successes, which are not being reported in the media. The other thing that's going on that's really fascinating is that there is regular communication between the Russian military and the U.S. Central Command in exchanging information over airspace and troop movements. Why? So that we don't have Russian forces firing at U.S. forces. And I had Colonel Schaefer on just 2 days ago, and he said that wasn't being reported, but that is going on. Yeah. So we're coordinating with the Russians to take out al-Qaeda and ISIS. I know Assad halfway doesn't like it because he's worried we might not leave. But the truth is, isn't Trump fulfilling his promise to not actually help the, quote, moderate rebels who are really al-Nusra, al-Qaeda? I mean, he's hitting them all, isn't he? Right. Well, look, the U.S. intelligence community has known for, boy, at least 4 years that the fighters that were actually fighting in Syria were not these, non-sectarian, secular Jeffersonian Democrat types. The ones who were actually out there fighting and killing and causing mayhem were the radical Islamists, like al-Nusra, like al-Qaeda, like ISIS. So that's been known in the intelligence community for at least 4 years, and maybe even a little longer than that. So, yet what was criminal in this is that the United States government continued through the CIA to supply weapons that were winding up in the hands of some of these radical Islamists. Now, why were we doing that? Well, the desire to get rid of Bashar al-Assad came because Saudi Arabia is terrified of Iran's rise to power in the Middle East.
So it's a Sunni Shiite civil war that we've sided with the Wahhabists on. Expanding on that, we have former high-level CIA analysts and State Department counterterrorism a gentleman joining us here. Let me ask you this then. What about Google banning criticizing Islam? What about Europe where they won't report the rapes? I mean, because I used to hear the right-wingers, I'm more of a libertarian, like there's a secret alliance and, you know, Brennan's a Wahhabist and they're going to have a caliphate and they're going to bring them in and we're going to have to capitulate to them. I'm like, okay, nutballs. Okay, I don't like radical Islam or Orthodox Islam. I get it. But come on, they're actually right. It's happening at colleges. The left is teaching it. Women by the thousands are putting hijabs on. They're shutting down our free speech. I mean, it is just the craziest crap I've ever seen. What's going on there?
I guess one of the saddest things, Alex, over the last really 16 years since the attacks of 9/11 is that the American public, by and large, have not become better informed about really the nature of the threat that arises from within Islam. Most do not understand the split between the Sunnis and the Shias. You know, I still hear today widely commented, it's said over and over by both Republicans and Democrats that Iran is the greatest state sponsor of terror. Well, that's simply not true. That was true 20 years ago. But when you look at all the terrorist attacks that have taken place in the last 15 years, most of them, I mean, 96% of them are linked to radical Sunnis. They're opposed to Iran. So is Iran a bad actor? Yeah, Iran's got its problems. I'm not arguing that there's some innocent here. But it doesn't do us any good in our public discussion to misinform and actually deceive the American public about the true nature of the threat. Because candidly, we'll find it much more easy to negotiate with Iran, where women can drive cars and women can serve in the legislature, than it will with the Saudis, who still live in a 13th century society. But we can't have that discussion because the Saudis have more oil than the Iranians, at least right now, that affects American interests. But it's just, I use that as an example of the kind of...
Absolutely. In the 5-6 minutes we have left, I want to pivot over to the East and North Korea, this crazy little goblin creature, a third-generation dictator, threatening to nuke Japan, threatening to nuke South Korea and Seoul, and obviously China is manipulating that. From your research, how much control does China have? But I see them so belligerent in the South China Sea, grabbing all these islands, you know, making threats, we'll nuke America, we'll kill you. I'm not a guy that wants war, but I mean, China, from my research, really has never talked like this. And I just wonder, we gave them everything, the Panama Canal, our jobs, they're buying Hollywood. I mean, are the communist generals completely delusional? Because I think Rex Tillerson and Trump are going to stand up to him. And now we have Rex Tillerson saying, okay, you're threatening us, you're pointing a gun at us. First strike is now on the table because you said it is. It just seems like an unprecedented escalation. I mean, we never ended the war, of course, as you know, with North Korea. It's just a ceasefire.
Well, you know, and we raised this earlier. Let me give you an example of one simple thing that the Chinese government has been actively involved with. In the United States, at luxury automobile dealerships, there's something called a straw buyers program or a straw leasers program. So what happens is you get stay-at-home moms, retired people, students. They'll find something in Craigslist inviting them to come out. They get paid $200 to $1,000 to go out and buy an automobile and or lease an automobile, and they do it in their name. But what happens is they're given a check, a cashier's check, and that cashier's check then goes to the dealer, and the car comes out of the dealership. They drive it down the road. They turn the keys over, and next thing you know, those cars are being sold in China. So you know, you're talking all the prominent luxury brands like Mercedes and Lexus and BMW. So you've got all of these going to China. Well, that's being done with the full knowledge of the Chinese government. And in fact, you're saying
they're actually stealing the cars.
Yeah, or they're illegally exporting them to China, and then but they're doing it with the full knowledge of the Chinese government. And once they're in China, then they're being sold below the price that the other, you know, the regular.
And China just ruthlessly undercuts everything, like Ross Perot said. Their own people don't get empowered by it. The whole world is sucked down by it.
Well, yeah. So the Chinese are they're genuinely an organized criminal enterprise. They're doing it across the board. I mean, I know of commodities that they are smuggling into the United States to other countries.
Oh, I mean, I don't want to bash China, but it's true. They're the biggest mass murderers in history of the communists. They're the ones, the reason all the rhinos and stuff are going extinct. They won't stop. And by the way, of course, they've invaded, they have an surplus of 50 million men because of the one-child policy. So they're openly saying, go to China. So I've talked to special ops that are all over Africa. They just say there's Chinese troops everywhere with their African families. It's incredible.
So, yeah, but with recognizing that China is a threat, again, I think one way to deal with that would be for us to work with Russia and trying to isolate China. Look, there's nothing to be gained.
And by the way, that's what General Flynn and the Pentagon want to do. They're not Russian agents. It makes sense. China's the big threat. Russia isn't. Russia wants us to come in and get their natural resources and develop them. Why don't we do that with Russia? Why are there neocons and the leftists? Why do they hate Russia so much?
Yeah. Well, I think one reason driving it is Russia's anti-homosexual policy. I think that has actually played a major influence.
Absolutely. I know Hollywood hates anything Christian.
Yeah. So it is, I don't think a war with Russia or with China is in anyone's interest. Those kinds of things have got to be avoided. We should not kid ourselves that you can have a limited war.
Well, think about that. Nuclear war with Russia that McCain's pushing because we won't let Western foundations in that'll teach 5-year-olds how to be gay. I mean, here's an article right here. Number of children wanting to become opposite sex doubling each year in Sweden. This is being done on purpose, declassified, as a population reduction, family-destroying mechanism. They've already been through 80 years of communism. Thank God Russia's rejecting it.
I wonder if the Chinese are ultimately behind this, because if they can get the West to stop reproducing, the Chinese will just outpace us in that regard, and they don't have to fire a shot.
Well, we know the robber barons and the globalists made deals 40 years ago with the Chinese. We know the CIA, bad elements of it, helped Mao get in 1949, and I think there's been a major long-term alliance. I mean, I remember back when I was a little kid listening to family and people that had been in the CIA, they'd be like, oh, you watch, we got an alliance with China, we're going to take over all the cheap goods. And I remember sitting there thinking, we're going to get double-crossed by that at like age 4. So there's just, I think America bought into this thing with China, that we'd be military, they'd be products, and together we take over. No, we're being double-crossed.
Look, I think, Alex, ultimately, there's a way that reasonable people can talk. There's going to be differences, but what really alarms me is that if you take a different point of view, if you dare to suggest that there might be a way to talk to Russia, all of a sudden, you're called a right-wing nut instead of listening to the substance of your argument.
No, worse than that, you're called a Russian agent. I mean, he said that was so crazy that Senator Paul works for Putin.
Right. Well, remember Adam Schiff, the Democrat leader on the House Intelligence Committee, called Tucker Carlson, that accused him of carrying water for the Kremlin.
That's right. I forgot that. Well, in the time we have, I'm just really appreciate your work. If you didn't know, articles have been written about it. It's confirmed. We have the screenshots where they banned your article and said it was fake news and spam. Other interesting tidbits you'd like to impart to the audience, because believe me, this interview is going to go viral.
Well, ultimately, it's the American people that are out there in the heartland. They understand when they're being lied to. They understand when they're not being told the truth. And I think if we just come together over this and begin putting pressure on these institutions, that they can eventually come around. But ultimately, our representatives, senators, have to hold these people accountable.
Well, I've got your absolutely.
Sorry, lack of that, DC.
Well, I've got your bio here, and it breaks down the fact that you were over a whole region, the chief analyst, and also one of the top people in counterterrorism at the State Department. So I think you can look forward, just in the last 2 minutes, look forward, Larry C. Johnson of NoQuarterUSA.net, into different lines of geopolitical developments. I'm not a rocket scientist. I can see what's going on. Most analysts say we're in the most dangerous time in our lives. Our elites, most of the Democrats, I got to say, don't even know what planet they're on. The old Republicans don't either. I don't say that arrogantly. I mean, Pelosi and Waters and people, and so does McCain, seem unstable and don't even have basic geography understanding anymore. And so where do you see this going? What do we do to stop it? Because good things are happening. Nationalism is expanding. People are waking up. People are saying we got to have countries to have our own rights. So what's most positive versus most negative? What do you see coming in the future on the positive outcome versus negative outcome with open talk of World War III?
Well, the positive side is that the internet is still not under government control, that there's still information outlets out there, that people do not have to rely upon the big 3 networks or the cable news channels in order to get their information. They can go outside of that. They can go to the source. They can do research. I mean, I wish I would have had when I was at CIA the kind of investigative power I have now, just standing at my computer at my home. And so there's great power in that information, and to network not just domestically but internationally, because we're not just talking about here in the United States. There are other people around the world who don't want to see a war like this either unfold.
And sure, you just said something very powerful. I'm sitting there, been on air 4 or 5 years. It's 1997, and I'm talking to an old guy from Air Force Intelligence who was the deputy fire chief, a friend of mine. He goes, "You need a website, Alex." Yeah, I had like a Yahoo News group then for a few years. So he goes, "It needs to be called InfoWar, because what you do is an info war, information war." I go, "Let's go look and see if the URL's available." We look, it's there. And I go, "Yeah, I've heard of InfoWar." And he goes, "Here, here's a couple of magazine articles on InfoWar." And he'd been involved in a bunch of clandestine stuff. He was a good patriot, Vic Vreeland. And so we launch it. Why wouldn't the government even think of something like that? But what you're saying about with computers, with the databases, with the research, with human intelligence interfacing with computers, what anybody in the world can do, aware of this stuff, can do it more investigative journalism, more research, more action than you could when you were in the CIA, because back then they were only kind of feeding you intel they wanted you to have, or you had to get your own and kind of suss stuff out. The average person, when they're involved and informed and taking action, is so powerful. And then you can criticize agencies because bad leadership, but the biggest group resisting globalism that I think helped put Trump in office was good groups in the intelligence agencies, was the veterans, and was corporate moles. And I know a lot of them, and they're ready. If the globalists push much harder, they've taken their restraint as weakness. It's not. It's more really wanting to fix things peaceful because the world's such a powder keg. So can you speak to what you just said briefly?
Well, Alex, what we're seeing as well is on another positive thing is I'm seeing this. It does cross some ideological divides. I myself tend to be, like a libertarian conservative, but I'm sharing views and the issues with people like Professor Stephen Cohen of Columbia University, who's always been, accused by some on the right as being a dupe of the communists, with Daniel Ellsberg, the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, or a variety of analysts. Some include whistleblowers from the NSA like Bill Binney and Thomas Drake and Kirk Beebe and Ed Loomis. And so we cover really quite a spectrum on the ideological.
And sure, when you look at all those lists, those were all game changers that helped bring down the Soviet Union, masterminds like Bill Binney and Drake and others, then getting demonized as dupes of Russia when they helped crush the communists.
Right. So it's a recognition that this is not a traditional right-left issue.
Right or wrong.
This goes back to the more fundamental issue that, look, we're a republic. The government should have some limits on what it can do to an individual. The government should have no power to invade your privacy and come into your home without a warrant and without having a good reason. And right now, as it's been uncovered in the last several weeks with the latest WikiLeaks revelations, we're seeing that, in fact, the CIA does have that power, and that power has probably been used.
Sure. Well, I don't know if they're going to be successful bullying Trump's people into apologizing for the sky being blue, but Larry C. Johnson, NoQuarterUSA.net, please come back soon. A lot of really informative information. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.